Very grateful to see you again, kiddo. I really cherish the time we get to spend together, and thank you for being with me tonight. If your mind feels like it's still moving, even though the room is quiet, that's all right. Sometimes the day keeps talking, even after you've stopped answering. So tonight, we're going to let the rain do its job. Let it soften the edges of the world. Let it make the room smaller and safer. And I'm going to tell you about a man who lived like a legend while he was still alive. A man who was part athlete, part storyteller, part mystery. His name was Leroy Robert Paige, but the world called him Satchel Paige. And if you've ever heard his name before, you probably heard it with a little smile. Because Satchel wasn't only famous for pitching, he was famous for the way he moved through life, like he was always a step ahead of the clock. Chapter 1. The Boy with the Bags. Satchel Paige was born in Mobile, Alabama on July 7, 1906. Now, even his birthday comes with some fog in the story, because Satchel's age was famously uncertain later in life. But the Hall of Fame lists his birth as July 7, 1906, and that date became the official one. He grew up in a part of Mobile sometimes described as down the bay. His mother's name was Lula. His father's name was John. His family was big. And big families learn early how to share space, how to share food, how to share hope. As a boy, Leroy worked at the train station carrying bags. And this is where the nickname Satchel comes in. There are different versions, but the central idea is the same. He carried luggage for passengers, and he figured out a way to carry more than one bag at a time. A pole, a rope, a rig that let him move several bags at once. And someone said he looked like a walking satchel tree, and the name stuck, Satchel. Isn't that how it goes? A lifetime nickname born from one afternoon of work. And even in that small detail, you can see him. Not a kid who waited for a gift, a kid who built a solution. Chapter 2. Reform School and a First Pitch. Satchel's childhood wasn't smooth. Saber notes that at around 12, he was sent to the industrial school for Negro children in Mount Meigs, Alabama, after trouble that included truancy and shoplifting. That sounds harsh, and it was. But inside that strict place, something unexpected happened. Satchel found the mound. He learned to pitch. And the Hall of Fame notes he began his pro career in the 1920s after being discharged from reform school. There's a strange truth in sports history. Sometimes the world pushes someone into a corner, and that corner becomes a doorway. Satchel grew into a tall, lanky pitcher, and people began to talk about his fastball. The Hall of Fame describes a buggy-whipped fastball, the kind of pitch that feels like it arrives before you finish blinking. But Satchel's gift wasn't only speed. It was theater. It was confidence. It was the sense that he wasn't just throwing a baseball. He was controlling the room. Chapter 3. The long road called the Negro Leagues. Now, kiddo, we need to talk about the Negro Leagues, because Satchel Paige's story can't be told truthfully without them. For decades, black players were barred from Major League Baseball. They built their own teams, their own leagues, their own business world around the game. And in those leagues, Satchel Paige became the biggest draw. The Hall of Fame calls him the biggest drawing card in Negro baseball, and notes the apocryphal stories that surrounded him. Saber traces his professional pitching to 1926 with the Chattanooga White Sox, and describes a career that stretched astonishingly long. From the 1920s to organized ball as late as the 1960s. That kind of longevity does something to a person. It turns you into a moving timeline. You don't just remember baseball. You are baseball, walking around. Chapter 4. Barnstorming Nights and Towns That Shut Down. One thing people forget today is how much baseball used to travel. Teams barnstormed, moving from town to town, playing for gates and crowds and cash. Sometimes they played in proper parks. Sometimes they played on fields that didn't look like fields. Sometimes the town shut down because Satchel was coming. The Baseball Hall of Fame talks about that barnstorming tradition and how future Hall of Famers, white and black, did it for decades. And with Satchel Paige, barnstorming wasn't a side hustle. It was a kingdom. In late 1946 and 1947, Satchel famously barnstormed as the main opponent to Bob Feller's touring Major League All-Star team, a major traveling spectacle of that era. Wikipedia notes this tour used airplanes to travel between sites and was described as extremely ambitious, with Feller recruiting big league stars and Paige leading a team of Negro League All-Stars. These games mattered. They weren't official MLB games, but they were real. They were proof. Proof that the talent people ignored was the talent they were missing. Chapter 5. The Art of Making a Pitch Feel Like a Story. Satchel Paige didn't just pitch, he performed. He could turn a game into a one-man show without ever raising his voice. He became famous for calling in his fielders, leaving himself and the catcher, and then still getting outs. Did it happen exactly as described every time people tell it? With Satchel, it's hard to separate literal fact from folklore. But the Hall of Fame itself says apocryphal stories surrounded him. And that's part of the truth too. Because whether every detail is perfect or not, the bigger truth is this: people believed it. They believed he could do impossible things. And the belief itself is a kind of power. Satchel also became famous for advice, short, funny lines that carried real wisdom. One line that follows him everywhere: how old would you be if you didn't know how old you were? The Hall of Fame has highlighted that quote in their social content because it fit him so well. He also had rules for staying young. Baseball Almanac preserves a list commonly attributed to him, including the famous line, "Don't look back, something might be gaining on you." That's a funny line, but it's also a philosophy. Keep moving forward. Don't let fear catch you staring behind. Chapter 6, Cleveland, 1948, and the Oldest Rookie. Now we arrive at one of the most famous chapters, 1948. Satchel Paige joined the Cleveland Indians and debuted in the majors. Officially, he was listed as 42. The Hall of Fame calls him the oldest rookie in American League history, and notes that some estimated he might have been even older. Think about that. Most rookies arrive wide-eyed. Satchel arrived like a man who had already lived 3 careers. He arrived with stories in his bones. And he wasn't there as a ceremonial guest. He helped them. The Hall of Fame notes he compiled a 6-1 record in 1948 and appeared in 21 games as Cleveland chased the pennant. Wikipedia gives more detail about his 1948 MLB season, including his record and ERA. Cleveland won the World Series that year, and Satchel Paige, who had been locked out of the majors in his prime, was part of a championship team when most men were thinking about retirement. That's not just baseball. That's history trying, a little late, to correct itself. Chapter 7, The Hall of Fame Door Opens. In 1971, Satchel Paige's election to the Hall of Fame changed baseball history. The Hall of Fame itself describes his induction as a turning point. He was the first player elected based solely on Negro Leagues time, and it marked a new era in Cooperstown. History.com also notes his Hall nomination and induction in 1971, and includes a famous appraisal attributed to Joe DiMaggio, calling Paige one of the best and fastest pitchers he faced. That matters, because it's the sport admitting publicly we missed something. We excluded something. And now we have to live with that truth. Satchel's life became proof that greatness can survive neglect. But it also became a reminder that surviving neglect is not the same as being treated fairly. Chapter 8. Grandpa's Rainy Night. Now, kiddo, let's pause for a moment. Hear the rain. Let it keep tapping the roof. Let the room be dark and safe. Satchel Paige's story is big. So big, it can feel like a myth. But underneath the legend is a simple human truth. He played, he traveled, he endured. He became famous in a world that didn't want him fully seen. And still, he kept going. That kind of perseverance is quiet courage, the kind you don't always notice in the moment. But later, when you look back, it feels like the strongest thing in the world. Chapter 9. Where We Go Next, Part 2 Preview. In Part 2, I'll finish the story with Satchel's later MLB years, including his time with the St. Louis Browns and the age 59 appearance that the Hall of Fame discusses. The deep lore, the showmanship, the mystery of his age, and why it mattered culturally. A sleep-friendly retelling of Negro League travel life and what it cost. The final legacy, what he gave baseball that baseball can never fully repay. And I'll close it the same way Grandpa always does, gently, with the rain still falling. Chapter 10. St. Louis, Kansas City, and the long goodbye that wasn't. After Cleveland, most people assumed Satchel Paige would fade away. That's how sports usually work. You get one late moment, one symbolic appearance, and then the door closes gently behind you. Satchel didn't follow that script. He never did. In 1951, Satchel Paige joined the St. Louis Browns. The Browns weren't a powerhouse. They were a struggling team, looking for attention, looking for relevance. And Satchel brought both. Officially, he was listed as being in his mid-40s. Unofficially, nobody really knew. That mystery was part of him. Not a lie, a shield. The Hall of Fame notes that Paige pitched effectively for the Browns, including several relief appearances that reminded fans this wasn't a novelty act. This was still a pitcher who could get outs. And here's something important. Satchel didn't just pitch, he drew crowds. People came to see him stand on the mound. They came to hear stories. They came to watch time bend a little. Chapter 11. The Myth of Age and the Truth Beneath It. Satchel Paige's age became a running joke. Reporters asked him constantly, "How old are you, Satchel?" He answered with riddles, with jokes, with lines that turned questions into smiles. "How old would you be," he once said, "if you didn't know how old you were?" That line gets laughs, but underneath it is something deeper. In a world that had denied him opportunity, Satchel refused to let numbers define his usefulness. Age to him wasn't a countdown, it was a suggestion. Chapter 12. The 1965 game that shouldn't have happened. Now comes one of the most remarkable footnotes in baseball history. In 1965, Satchel Paige pitched in a major league game, officially, publicly, for the Kansas City Athletics. He was listed as 59 years old. 59. The Hall of Fame describes this appearance as one of the most extraordinary moments in sports history. He pitched 3 innings. He gave up 1 hit. He did not allow a run. Think about that. 3 scoreless innings at an age when most men were long retired, their uniforms folded into memory. That wasn't nostalgia, that was proof. Chapter 13. The Man Off the Mound. Satchel Paige was more than a pitcher. He was a thinker, a talker, a man who understood people. He wrote, he spoke. He shared his rules for staying young. Some were playful, some were profound. All were his. One rule said, "Avoid fried meats which angry up the blood." Another said, "Keep the juices flowing by jangling around gently as you move." They sound funny, but listen closely. They're about motion, about not stagnating, about staying curious. Chapter 14. Legacy in a Changing Game. Satchel Paige lived long enough to see baseball change. He saw integration. He saw Negro League players finally acknowledged. He saw history rewritten slowly, sometimes reluctantly. But he never demanded apologies. He accepted recognition when it came. And when it didn't, he kept moving. That's strength. Not the loud kind, the durable kind. Chapter 15. The Hall of Fame and the Long View. When Satchel Paige entered the Hall of Fame in 1971, it wasn't just an induction, it was an admission, an acknowledgement that baseball's story had been incomplete. Satchel stood there not as a correction, but as a reminder that greatness finds a way to be remembered, even when the road is long. Chapter 16. The Final Years. Satchel Paige passed away in 1982 at the age of 75, or maybe older, or maybe younger. It doesn't really matter. What matters is how full his life was, how many miles he traveled, how many innings he threw, how many people he inspired. Chapter 17. Grandpa's Closing Thoughts. Why Satchel Still Matters. Some athletes chase records. Satchel Paige chased possibility. He showed the world that time doesn't always win, that opportunity delayed is not opportunity erased. The joy can live alongside injustice without surrendering to it. And that's why his story belongs on nights like this. Rainy nights, quiet nights, the kind of nights where you don't need fireworks. You just need a steady voice reminding you that endurance counts. So tonight, kiddo, as the rain keeps tapping the window and your breathing slows, remember Satchel Paige, the boy with the bags, the man with the fastball, the legend who refused to let time tell him who he was. Sleep now. The rain will keep the rest of the story safe.